Queen of Spades. That was the card that ended the reign of the Duke of Montrose. It lay face up on the green baize table, innocent and deadly. Around it, the air in the private gaming hell was thick with cigar smoke and silence. 50 of the wealthiest men in London were holding their breath. They were witnessing the fall of a titan. Lord Julian Montrose sat frozen. His hand, usually steady enough to shoot the wick off a candle at 20 paces, was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He looked at the card. He looked at the pile of deeds in the centre of the table. The deed to Montrose Hall, the deed to the London townhouse, the deed to the stables, the silver, the very shirt on his back. He had bet it all, and he had lost. Opposite him sat the winner. She was known simply as Madame Varo. No one knew where she came from. She had arrived in London a month ago, a widow draped in black lace and diamonds, with a rumour trailing her that she had bankrupted a Russian prince in Monte Carlo. She sat perfectly still. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched him with eyes that were dark, intelligent, and terrifyingly unreadable. "It is done, my lord," she said. Her voice was low, with a faint exotic accent that no one could quite place. "The house wins." Julian swallowed. The taste of brandy turned to ash in his mouth. He was ruined, not just poor, obliterated. The Montrose line, which had stood for 400 years, had ended on a turn of a card. He stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I shall have the papers drawn up in the morning," he rasped. "There is no need," Madame Varo said, gathering the cards with long, elegant fingers. "My solicitor is outside. He has the transfer documents ready. You need only sign." Julian stared at her. "You were that confident?" "I do not gamble, Lord Montrose," she said, meeting his gaze. "I invest, and I never invest in a losing horse." She stood up. She was tall, regal. She signalled to the door. "Sign the papers, Julian. And then leave. My carriage will take you to a boarding house. I believe you can no longer afford a cab." The room erupted in whispers as Julian walked to the door. He felt their eyes, the pity, the scorn. He signed the papers with a shaking hand, handing over his birthright to a stranger. He walked out into the London fog, a man with nothing but the clothes he stood up in. But who was Madame Varo? And why did she look at the Duke, not with triumph, but with a strange, simmering anger? To understand the end of the game, we must go back to the beginning, or rather, to the engagement that never happened, 5 years earlier. Julian Montrose was 22, wild and drowning in debt. His father, the old Duke, had arranged a marriage to save him. The bride was Lady Seraphina, the daughter of a wealthy northern industrialist. Julian had refused to even meet her. "I will not marry a factory girl," he had shouted at his father. "I will not be sold like a prize bull." He had fled to the continent. He spent 5 years in Paris, Rome and Vienna, learning the art of the cards. He became a legend, the luck of Montrose. He won fortunes and lost them in the same night. He forgot about the girl in the north. He forgot about his duty until his father died and he returned to London to find the estate crumbling. He tried to gamble his way out of debt. It worked for a while, until Madame Varo appeared. She had targeted him. He saw that now. She had sat at his table every night for a week, losing small amounts, learning his style. She had lured him in. She had played the part of the bored, wealthy widow perfectly. And now she owned him. For 3 days, Julian lived in a squalid room in Whitechapel. He sold his gold watch to buy bread. He stared at the cracked ceiling, the shame burning in his gut like acid. On the 4th day, a carriage arrived. It was black, with the Montrose crest painted over in black lacquer. A footman stepped out. "Madame Varo requests your presence," the footman said. Julian laughed bitterly. To what? To mock me? To offer me a job cleaning her boots? The footman didn't smile. She requests your presence at the altar, my lord. Julian froze. The altar? He got in the carriage. He had nothing left to lose. They drove to a small private chapel on the outskirts of the city. Inside it was empty, save for a priest and the woman in black. She turned as he entered. She wasn't wearing a veil. Her face was stark, beautiful and cold. What is this? Julian demanded, walking down the aisle. A business proposition, Madame Varo said. She held up a document. It was the deed to Montrose Hall. You want your life back, Julian. You want your title, your home. More than anything, he whispered. Then marry me, she said. Julian stared at her. You want to be a duchess? Is that it? You stole my fortune to force me into marriage? I stole nothing, she corrected him. I won it. Fairly. And yes, I require the title. Why? Because a widow with money is prey, she said calmly. Every fortune hunter in Europe is circling me. I need the protection of a ducal coronet. And you need a roof over your head. She stepped closer. I will return the estate to you, Julian, on one condition. You will never touch a card again. If you gamble 1 penny, the deal is void and I throw you out. Julian looked at the deed. He looked at the woman. She was a mystery, a demon, a saviour. I accept, he said. They were married 10 minutes later. No rings, no kiss, just a signature in a register. The carriage ride back to Montrose Hall was silent. When they arrived, the servants were lined up looking confused. The Duke has returned, Madame Varo announced, sweeping past them. Prepare the master suite. For me, the Duke will sleep in the guest wing. And so began the strangest marriage in the history of the peerage. Julian expected her to be a tyrant. He expected her to parade her victory. But she didn't. She simply took over. She managed the estate with a terrifying efficiency. She fired the corrupt steward. She balanced the books. She invested in the railways. Montrose Hall, which had been decaying for a decade, began to shine again. Julian watched her. He watched her across the dinner table. She rarely spoke. She read books on economics and philosophy. She played the piano with a violence that frightened him. Who are you? He asked one night after too much wine. Where did you learn to play cards like that? She didn't look up from her book. Survival, she said. A woman alone must have skills. What happened to your first husband? Monsieur Varo? She turned a page. There was no Monsieur Varo. It was a name I borrowed from a painting. Julian frowned. You lied? I bluffed Julian. It is the same thing. He found himself fascinated by her. She was a puzzle he couldn't solve. She knew things about him. His favourite wine, the way he liked his coffee, the fact that he slept with the window open. How do you know that? He asked one morning, when the coffee arrived exactly as he liked it. I observe, she said. Good gamblers observe. But it was the nights that tortured him. He would hear her walking in the room above his, pacing. Sometimes he thought he heard her crying. One night, a month into the marriage, he couldn't take it any more. He went upstairs. He knocked on her door. Go away, Julian, she called out. Her voice was thick. He opened the door. She was sitting by the fire. She wasn't wearing her severe black dresses. She was wearing a white nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer, and she was holding something, a miniature portrait. Julian walked closer. He looked at the painting in her hand. It was him, a portrait of him at 22, before the gambling, before the ruin. Where did you get that? He whispered. She tried to hide it, but he caught her wrist. Seraphina gave it to me, she said, pulling away. Seraphina, the girl I was supposed to marry? Yes, you knew her? I was her companion, Madame Varo lied. She died 3 years ago. Of a broken heart, they said. Her father lost his fortune, and the shame killed him. She was left with nothing. Julian felt a pang of guilt. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, she snapped, her eyes flashing. You were in Paris, spending gold while she starved. She loved you, you fool. She kept this portrait by her bed. She waited for you. She stood up, pacing the room. She told me about you. She told me you were kind, that you were just lost. She made me promise, if I ever met you, to save you. Julian stared at her. So this, the gambling, the marriage, it was all for her. It was a debt of honour, she said, turning away. I fulfilled her dying wish. I saved the Montrose estate. Julian looked at her back. He looked at the way her shoulders shook. Something clicked in his mind. A memory of a letter his father had sent him years ago. The girl is clever, Julian. She has a mind for numbers. She plays chess like a grandmaster. He looked at the chessboard on the table. A game was in progress. Black was winning. He looked at her hands. The long, elegant fingers that had shuffled the cards. He took a step forward. What was Seraphina's middle name? He asked softly. She froze. Why does it matter? Tell me, Rose, she whispered. Madame Varo. Varo. An anagram for a rose, or perhaps a vow. Julian walked around to face her. He reached out and touched her chin, lifting her face to the light. He looked past the diamonds, past the cynicism, past the years of hardness. He saw the grey eyes of the northern industrialist. You are not her companion, he said, his voice trembling. You are her. She didn't deny it. She didn't pull away. She just closed her eyes, tears leaking out. Seraphina, he breathed. I tried to tell you, she sobbed. 5 years ago, I wrote to you in Paris. I told you I would wait. You never answered. I never got the letters, Julian swore. I moved around too much. When my father died, I had nothing, she said, her voice rushing out now. I had to survive. I used my mind for numbers. I learned the cards. I became Madame Varo to protect myself. I built a fortune, Julian, a fortune big enough to buy a dukedom. Why? He asked. Why come back for me? I abandoned you because I promised, she whispered. I promised the boy in the portrait that I would look after him. And because, God help me, I loved you. Even when I hated you, I loved you. Julian fell to his knees. He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in the white cotton of her gown. I am so sorry, he wept. I was a boy, a stupid, arrogant boy. I know, she said, stroking his hair. That is why I had to break the boy to find the man. She looked down at him. The game is over, Julian. No more bluffs, no more masks. Julian looked up. He took her hand, the hand that had dealt the Queen of Spades, and kissed the palm. You won, he said. You cleaned me out. I didn't win. She smiled sadly. I just bet on the long odds. But I have nothing to offer you, Julian said. You own it all. The house, the money, the title. You have one thing, she said. What? You have the rest of your life, she whispered. And I believe you owe me a dance. We never had a wedding dance. Julian stood up. He took her in his arms. There was no music, only the crackle of the fire and the sound of the rain against the window. He hummed a waltz, a slow, clumsy waltz. They danced in the bedroom, the gambler and the wife, the ruined duke and the mystery woman. He never touched a card again. He didn't need to. He realised that the greatest thrill wasn't the turn of a card, but the waking up every morning next to the woman who had known him better than he knew himself. Years later, when their son asked about the Queen of Spades framed on the wall of the study, Julian would smile. That, he would say, is the most expensive card in history. It cost me a fortune, but it bought me a life. It's a story about the ultimate gamble. Seraphina bet her entire life, her identity, her fortune, her heart, on the chance that Julian was worth saving. She played the villain to be the hero. And it brings us to a difficult question. Seraphina manipulated him. She humiliated him. She broke him down to build him back up. Some would say that's not love, that's control. Others would say it was the only way to save an addict. If you were Julian, could you forgive her for the deception? Or would the fact that she owned you always sting? I think I'd forgive her, eventually, but I'd never play poker with her. If you enjoyed this high-stakes romance, go all in on that like button. It tells the algorithm we're holding a winning hand, and if you want to join our table, hit subscribe. The house always wins, but here, the house is built on stories. Until next time, know when to hold 'em and know when to fold 'em.